There's a feeling most leadership teams know. Everyone is moving, meetings are full, Slack is active, and people are responsive. To everyone, business feels alive. Then you pause to ask some simple questions. What actually got decided this week? What standard got clarified? Did ownership shift in a way that won't drift back next week? You'll find the answer is harder to pinpoint. Everything feels active, yet nothing feels settled. There isn't a performance problem. It rarely is. The team isn't lazy, they're doing a lot of work. But what's happening is simpler. The system is generating motion to compensate for missing definition. Have you noticed this before? When standards aren't clear, work expands. Decisions without owners creates looping conversations. Without a clear definition of done, nothing closes. Activity becomes the substitute for clarity. Not because people are irresponsible, it's because the environment doesn't tell capable people when the loop is closed. Most leadership teams misdiagnose this. They see motion and assume the issue is execution, so they add check-ins. Timelines get tightened and updates get requested more frequently. That creates more motion. It also creates the feeling of progress, yet the underlying issue stays untouched. Guardrails were never set. Call maker was never named and non-negotiables were never defined. So the work keeps circling. Here's the mechanism. When a project doesn't have clear ownership, it defaults to shared responsibility. Now, shared responsibility sounds collaborative, but in practice means no one can close the loop. If everyone owns it, no one owns it. So the work stays open. Someone drafts a proposal. It goes to the team for input. Input comes back. Revisions get made to the draft. It goes back out for alignment. More input arrives. No one has the authority to say, this is done, not because they're weak, but because the threshold was never set. There's no standard, no line in the sand. The definition that says, past this point we stop doesn't exist. So refining continues. Alignment stretches on and the circling resumes. Everyone interprets that motion as diligence. Here's one version you've probably lived through. You're trying to make a senior hire for a critical hire with tight timelines. Strong candidate comes through. Now your VP of Ops thinks they're solid, but your CFO has concerns about the comp structure. The head of product wants to see how they'd approach a specific problem. So you schedule another round. Candidate comes back and knocks it out of the park. Now someone wants to loop in a board member for an extra perspective, while another person suggests just one more reference call. Then a question about culture fit surfaces. One that nobody defined early. As you can imagine, 6 weeks in, the candidate is still interested, but you can feel them cooling. Nobody wants to delay it, yet the process kept opening because the decisions didn't have a close condition. Decision ownership wasn't clear at the start. The non-negotiables weren't defined up front. No threshold existed that said, if they clear this bar, we move forward. So naturally, it stayed open. More input, another round gets scheduled, additional stakeholders get looped in. Not because the hire required it, because the system never defined when it didn't. Here's what makes this uncomfortable to pinpoint. Being busy feels safer than being clear. Why? Because clarity requires commitment. Commitment creates consequences. Consequences make the boundary real. If you define the standard, you own it. Declare the decision, and you're accountable for it. Name the call maker, and you've created a lane someone can fail inside. Motion, it doesn't require any of that. It lets everyone stay responsive, adaptive, collaborative. It feels like leadership, but often it's just avoidance that resembles effort. A team can feel this, even if they can't name it. They work hard, but they wait. Wait for someone to say what good looks like, for someone to decide. Stopping without permission feels risky, so the loop continues. Another revision, one more sync, another stakeholder. Work just keeps moving and closure never happens. If you're leading a company like this, you probably recognize the pattern. You're accessible, you're in the meetings and responding in the threads. It's easy to tell yourself that's what good leadership looks like. You're responsive, present, and in with the team. But here's the question worth sitting with. Are you leading or are you just present? Responsiveness isn't stewardship and speed isn't alignment. If your team keeps coming back to you for clarity, decisions, or permission, that's not trust, that's dependency. The system is reverting upward because it doesn't know where else to close. Standards aren't visible, ownership isn't explicit, and guardrails aren't defined. So they keep coming back, and you keep responding. Everyone mistakes that cycle for momentum. Watch for this. This pattern shows up most clearly under pressure. Pressure doesn't create the problem, it just reveals what's real. Calendar collapses, the client escalates, and deadlines move up. That's when you see whether the guardrails exist or whether they were only implied. Now, let me show you what I mean. A client escalates an issue on a Thursday afternoon. It's visible, but not catastrophic. A response is needed by first thing Monday. Now, your account lead loops in product. Product says they need input from engineering before they can commit to the timeline, and engineering needs scope clarity before they can estimate. So a call gets scheduled for Friday morning, but Friday's call runs longer than expected for a simple reason. No one agreed beforehand what decision needed to be made. Then someone suggests a workaround. Another person raises concerns about precedent, and legal gets mentioned as a potential checkpoint. So Friday ends without an answer, and you now have a plan to regroup Monday morning. Monday shows up. The client is more frustrated, and your account lead is in your office asking what to tell them. As usual, you step in, you make the call in 10 minutes, and execution happens. So what just happened? The escalation path defaulted to you, not because the team was incapable, because the system never defined who the call maker is for this type of issue. Guardrails were never set. Non-negotiables weren't visible, and the definition of done wasn't established for the decision itself. So under pressure, the decision reverted back to the founder. Once that pattern exists, it becomes quite sticky. The team learns that clarity comes from you and you alone. It doesn't come from the role, guardrails, or the standard. It only comes from your presence. So they wait, you respond. The business stays noisy. Here's another version. Two teams need to hand off a project, so marketing builds the campaign while sales needs to execute. Marketing finishes their part and sends it over. Sales looks at it and realizes lead qualification criteria weren't fully defined, so they send it back with questions. Marketing clarifies everything and sends it again. Sales now has questions about the follow-up sequence. Marketing complains it was never in the original scope, but sales says they can't run it without that piece. So the project stalls. Both teams are working and both teams care. It's just the handoff never had a shared definition of done. Marketing thought done meant assets delivered, while sales thought it meant a fully executable playbook. Nobody was wrong. Complete was simply never defined by the system. So the loop starts. Clarifications, new questions that should have been constraints. A meeting gets scheduled to align, more input, additional revisions. Drift sets in. 3 weeks later, the campaign launches late, only now the market moment has shifted slightly. It's not that either team failed, it's just that the structure didn't hold. Now, I'd like to add, AI doesn't change this. It can accelerate execution, but it can't decide what done means. The cost of this isn't super obvious at first. Revenue might still be growing and engagement might still be high across the team. There's a tax being paid. It's paid in rework, second guessing, that drains energy, and it shows up in repeated alignment conversations that never turn into closure. Energy that could be building leverage gets spent maintaining motion. Decisions that should happen once get relitigated across threads and meetings, and leaders who should be thinking in years get trapped in the day-to-day. The business starts to feel heavy, not because it's failing, but because it's unclear. Weight doesn't come from the work itself, it comes from the lack of definition around the work. That weight compounds slowly, subtly. Then one day, you realize the business is running you. It's hard to see because the symptoms look like virtues. Activity looks like engagement. Responsiveness looks like care, and motion looks like momentum. In the short term, it can even produce results, but it still doesn't scale. Presence-dependent system breaks the moment the load increases. It needs the founder in the room. Real-time clarification becomes essential. It requires a live call maker because no call maker exists on paper. Now, that can work when the company is small, but as the business grows, the noise grows with it. More people and more projects. Additional decisions pile up, and places with undefined boundaries create multiplied looping. Guardrails stay missing while founders get louder and busier. Calendars fill while Slack goes nuts, and weekends, they disappear. It's tempting to normalize that. I mean, calling it the price of growth feels reasonable, but it's not. This is the interest you pay when definition is missing. Here's the part that usually creates friction. The team can't fix this on their own. After all, they're behaving rationally inside the environment they're in. When standards aren't visible, they keep asking questions, and call makers that were never clarified create default escalations. Without a definition of done, refining never stops. They aren't doing it to frustrate you. It's just that the system never tells them where the boundary is. So the question isn't, why won't they stop? The real question is, where did we fail to define what stop means? If the business went quiet for a week, what would become obvious? Would you see standards that hold or gaps where standards should have been? Because busyness isn't momentum, it's motion without closure.